In the frozen forests of Finland, where winter temperatures plummet to 40 degrees below zero and darkness claims the land for 20 hours a day, a small man in white moved through the snow like a phantom. The Soviets called him Belaya Smert, the White Death. His real name was Simo Häyhä, and before the war, he was simply a farmer who loved to hunt. Standing barely 5 feet tall, weighing just over 150 pounds, Häyhä seemed an unlikely candidate for military legend. Yet in the span of roughly 100 days during the Winter War of 1939 to 1940, this unassuming Finn would become the most lethal sniper in military history, credited with over 500 confirmed kills, all without the aid of a telescopic scope. Simo Häyhä was born on December 17, 1905, in the municipality of Rautjärvi, near the Russian border in southeastern Finland. He was the second eldest of 8 children born to Juho and Katriina Häyhä. The family lived a modest life, working their small farm in the hamlet of Mietilä, where survival depended on hard work, resourcefulness, and an intimate knowledge of the harsh Nordic environment. From an early age, Simo learned to hunt. In the Finnish countryside, hunting wasn't sport, it was necessity. The forests provided meat for the table and furs for trade or warmth. Young Simo took to it naturally, spending countless hours in the woods, learning to read animal tracks, to move silently through underbrush, and most importantly, to shoot straight. By his teenage years, Häyhä had developed an almost supernatural accuracy with a rifle. He practiced constantly, shooting at targets, hunting game, and participating in local shooting competitions. He joined a Civil Guard unit, a volunteer military organization that trained Finnish citizens in marksmanship and basic military skills. These Civil Guard units would prove invaluable when war came. Häyhä's weapon of choice was the Finnish M2830 rifle, a variant of the Soviet Mosin Nagant that had been captured during Finland's civil war and modified by Finnish gunsmiths. He knew this rifle intimately, every quirk, every adjustment needed for different conditions. He could strip it, clean it, and reassemble it blindfolded. The rifle became an extension of his body. But Simo Häyhä had no grand ambitions. He was content with his quiet life, farming in summer, hunting in winter, competing in shooting matches when time allowed. He stood just 160 centimeters tall, had a gentle demeanor, and rarely spoke unless he had something important to say. Those who knew him described him as humble, hard-working, and utterly unpretentious. Then, on November 30th, 1939, everything changed. The Soviet Union, under Joseph Stalin, demanded territorial concessions from Finland. When the Finnish government refused, Stalin ordered an invasion. He expected a quick victory. The Soviet Union had a population of 170 million, compared to Finland's 3.7 million. The Red Army fielded over 450,000 troops for the invasion, supported by thousands of tanks and aircraft. Finland could muster barely 300,000 soldiers, most of them reservists, with limited armor and an air force of obsolete planes. Stalin believed his forces would reach Helsinki, the Finnish capital, within weeks. He was catastrophically wrong. The Finnish terrain was brutal, even for those who knew it. For the Soviets, it became a frozen hell. Dense forests, countless lakes, and temperatures that froze fuel and frostbit flesh made every mile a struggle. The Finns, fighting on their home ground, used the landscape like a weapon. When mobilization orders went out, Simo Häyhä was called to serve with the 6th Company of the 34th Infantry Regiment, assigned to the Kollaa river sector in the Karelia region. He was 34 years old, a corporal in the reserves. He packed his rifle, his white winter camouflage suit, and provisions for what he thought might be a few weeks of service. He would be gone for months, and he would become a legend. The Kollaa river sector where Häyhä served was crucial to Finnish defense. If the Soviets broke through here, they could split Finland in two and threaten the entire war effort. The Finnish forces here were outnumbered by factors of 10 to 1, sometimes more. They had no choice but to fight smart, use guerrilla tactics, and make every shot count. Häyhä was assigned as a sniper, a role that suited him perfectly. While other soldiers fired in volleys or conducted raids, Häyhä worked alone, stalking through the forests like the hunters he had spent his life with in these very woods. His techniques were simple but devastatingly effective. First, he refused to use a telescopic sight on his rifle. Other snipers favored scopes for their magnification and precision, but Häyhä understood their drawbacks in Arctic conditions. Scopes could fog up, the lens could glint in sunlight and give away a position, and using a scope required raising your head higher above cover. Häyhä used only iron sights, the basic open sights built into the rifle. At the distances he typically shot, between 150 and 400 meters, his iron sights were more than adequate, and his years of hunting experience had trained him to judge distance and windage instinctively. Second, he took extraordinary measures to remain invisible. He wore pure white winter camouflage that blended perfectly with the snow. He positioned himself in locations with natural cover and concealment. He would pack snow in front of his position to prevent his rifle's muzzle blast from kicking up powder and revealing his location. In the coldest weather, he would hold snow in his mouth while shooting so his breath wouldn't create a visible vapor cloud. Third, he was patient, where less experienced soldiers might grow anxious or bored. Häyhä could lie motionless in the snow for hours, waiting for the perfect shot. He endured temperatures that would kill an unprepared man, sometimes staying in position all day and through the night. Finally, he was methodical. He kept a careful count of his kills, reporting them to his officers. Each confirmed kill was verified by spotters or other soldiers. There was no exaggeration, no propaganda inflation. The numbers were real. Häyhä's first confirmed kills came in early December 1939, shortly after the war began. Soviet infantry units were advancing through the forests near the Kollaa River, moving in columns along the limited roads and paths. They wore dark uniforms that stood out starkly against the white snow. They were cold, often disoriented, and had poor reconnaissance of the terrain. Häyhä positioned himself along a ridgeline overlooking a Soviet advance route. He lay in the snow, his white camouflage making him nearly invisible, his rifle resting on a small berm of packed snow. He controlled his breathing, slowed his heart rate, and waited. Through his iron sights, he watched Soviet soldiers trudging through the deep snow. They moved in a loose formation, talking to each other, their rifles slung over their shoulders. They had no idea a Finnish sniper was watching them. Häyhä picked his target carefully. Not the lead soldier, that would alert the others too quickly. Not the rear guard, they might not notice immediately. He chose a soldier in the middle of the formation, aimed carefully, exhaled slowly, and squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked across the frozen forest. The Soviet soldier dropped instantly, killed before he hit the ground. For a moment, the other soldiers stood confused, looking around, trying to understand what had happened. Häyhä had already worked the bolt of his rifle, chambering another round. He fired again. Another soldier fell, then another. By the time the Soviet unit realized they were under fire and scattered for cover, Häyhä had killed 5 men. He slipped away through the forest, silent and unseen, relocating to a new position before they could organize a response. As the days turned to weeks, Häyhä's kill count grew at an astonishing rate. Some days he would kill a dozen Soviet soldiers. On exceptional days, his count reached 20 or more. He operated primarily during daylight hours when visibility was best, though the Finnish winter meant daylight lasted only a few hours each day. His company commander quickly recognized Häyhä's extraordinary skill and gave him considerable freedom to operate as he saw fit. While other soldiers held defensive positions or conducted patrols, Häyhä roamed the sector, hunting Soviet soldiers with lethal efficiency. The Soviets began to realize something terrible was happening in the Kollaa sector. Soldiers were dying from single, precise shots fired from impossible distances by an enemy they never saw. Officers were particularly targeted. Radio operators, medics, anyone who appeared important became priority targets. The psychological effect was devastating. Soviet soldiers began calling him the White Death. They started to fear the forests, knowing that any moment could be their last, that an invisible Finnish sniper might have them in his sights. The fear was well-founded. Häyhä was hunting them constantly. The Soviets responded by sending their own snipers to hunt for Häyhä. These were experienced marksmen, some of them veterans of previous conflicts, equipped with scoped rifles and orders to eliminate the White Death at any cost. They all failed. Häyhä's fieldcraft was simply superior. He changed positions constantly, never shooting from the same location twice if he could avoid it. He studied the terrain obsessively, finding hides that offered perfect fields of fire while remaining concealed. He understood light and shadow, how to position himself so he was invisible even from a few meters away. When Soviet counter-snipers came looking for him, they often became his victims. Häyhä would identify them by their behavior, the way they moved cautiously, scanning tree lines and ridges. He would wait until they settled into a hide, then kill them before they ever spotted him. One particular incident became famous among Finnish troops. A Soviet sniper team, 3 men with scoped rifles, had been deployed specifically to kill Häyhä. They took positions overlooking an area where Häyhä had been operating. They waited for 2 days, watching through their scopes, confident they would catch him. Häyhä had spotted them on the first day. He circled around their position, approached from behind, and killed all 3 with his rifle. He then took their scoped rifles and turned them in to his commanders as trophies. The Soviets sent artillery barrages targeting areas where they thought Häyhä might be hiding. They sent small infantry units to sweep the forests. They offered rewards for information about the White Death. Nothing worked. Häyhä continued his deadly work. Day after day, his kill count climbing into numbers that seemed impossible. Despite his deadly profession, Häyhä remained remarkably humble and human. When he returned to his unit's positions after a day of sniping, he would share his rations with other soldiers, tell quiet stories about hunting before the war, and maintain his equipment with meticulous care. He wrote letters home to his family, though he rarely mentioned his activities at the front. His letters focused on mundane matters, asking about the farm, about his siblings, expressing hope that the war would end soon and he could return to his normal life. Fellow soldiers described him as kind and soft-spoken. He never boasted about his kills or sought recognition. When officers praised his work, he would simply nod and say he was doing his duty, nothing more. Some soldiers found his humility remarkable given his deadly efficiency. Others found it unsettling, this gentle farmer who killed with such cold precision. The truth was that Häyhä had simply compartmentalized his life. When he was in the forest with his rifle, he was a predator, calculating and lethal. When he returned to camp, he was Simo the farmer, the quiet man who missed his home and wanted the war to end. The conditions Häyhä endured were nearly inhuman. Temperatures in the Kollaa sector regularly dropped to -40 degrees Celsius, cold enough to freeze exposed skin in minutes. Häyhä would spend entire days lying motionless in the snow, his body temperature dropping dangerously low, frostbite a constant threat. He suffered from the cold constantly. His fingers and toes ached, his joints stiffened, but he never complained and never requested relief from duty. He understood that every day he spent hunting Soviet soldiers was a day the Finnish lines held, a day his country remained free. By late January 1940, Häyhä had been fighting continuously for nearly 2 months. His kill count had passed 300 confirmed kills with his rifle, with additional kills from his submachine gun in closer combat situations. He was exhausted, but the Soviets kept coming, wave after wave, and Finland needed every skilled soldier fighting. The Kollaa sector had become legendary in Finland. Against overwhelming odds, the Finnish forces there had held, inflicting massive casualties on Soviet forces. Häyhä was a significant part of that success, but he was just one man among many brave Finnish soldiers who refused to yield. Still, his reputation had grown beyond his regiment. Newspapers in Finland published stories about the mysterious sniper who was decimating Soviet ranks. Foreign correspondents picked up the stories. The White Death became known internationally as a symbol of Finnish resistance. Häyhä found the attention uncomfortable. He was a soldier doing his job, nothing more. By early March 1940, the Winter War was nearing its end. The Soviet Union, embarrassed by its failures and suffering casualties that far exceeded expectations, had reorganized its forces and launched massive new offensives. The Finns were exhausted, running out of ammunition and supplies, and could not hold indefinitely. On March 6, 1940, Simo Häyhä went into the forest for what would be his last hunt of the war. His kill count stood at approximately 500 confirmed sniper kills, plus an estimated 200 additional kills with his Suomi KP-31 submachine gun in close quarters combat. The exact numbers are debated by historians, but even the most conservative estimates place him as the most successful sniper in military history. That day, Häyhä was working in his usual sector when Soviet forces launched a desperate attack. Artillery shells rained down on Finnish positions. Infantry advanced in large numbers, trying to break through by sheer weight of force. Häyhä engaged targets as they appeared, firing his rifle with mechanical precision. Soviet soldiers fell one after another. Then, in the chaos of battle, a Soviet soldier spotted him. The details of exactly what happened are unclear, as Häyhä never spoke extensively about it, but the result was catastrophic. An explosive bullet, either from a Soviet rifle or possibly from a small artillery round, struck Häyhä in the face. The left side of his jaw was destroyed. The bullet or shrapnel tore through his cheek, shattered teeth, and exited through his left cheek. It was a horrific wound that should have killed him instantly. Somehow, Häyhä remained conscious. He stumbled back toward Finnish lines, blood pouring from his face. Other Finnish soldiers found him and rushed him to a field hospital. Medics looked at his wound and expected him to die within hours. The damage was simply too severe. He remained in a coma for over a week. When he finally regained consciousness, the Winter War was over. Finland had signed a peace treaty with the Soviet Union on March 13, 1940, ceding significant territory but maintaining its independence. Häyhä's recovery was long and painful. The left side of his face was permanently disfigured. He required multiple reconstructive surgeries. He would carry the physical scars for the rest of his life. When Häyhä had recovered sufficiently, he learned that he had been promoted from corporal to second lieutenant by Field Marshal Carl Gustav Emil Mannerheim himself, the commander of all Finnish forces. It was an extraordinary honor, a battlefield commission recognizing his contributions to Finland's defense. Häyhä was also awarded various medals and commendations. The Finnish government recognized him as a national hero. Foreign governments requested to meet him. He politely declined most interviews and public appearances, preferring to return to his farm and his quiet life. After recovering from his wounds, Häyhä did return to farming. When the Continuation War broke out in 1941, Finland fighting alongside Germany against the Soviet Union, Häyhä was not recalled to active service due to his injuries. He spent the war years farming and hunting, living quietly in the Finnish countryside. After the war, he became a successful businessman, involved in moose hunting and dog breeding. He never married, but maintained close relationships with his family and the few friends he allowed into his private life. Despite his fame, Häyhä remained remarkably humble throughout his life. When asked about his wartime service, he would typically give brief, matter-of-fact answers. He never glorified war or killing. He simply said he did what was necessary for his country. In interviews later in life, he was asked what he felt when he shot enemy soldiers. His response was characteristically simple. "I did what I was told to do, as well as I could." When asked his secret for being such an effective sniper, he would talk about practice, patience, and knowing the terrain. Nothing mystical, nothing complicated, just a farmer who knew how to shoot and had the determination to do it well. Häyhä lived to the remarkable age of 96, dying on April 1st, 2002. He had survived not only his catastrophic facial wound, but had outlived nearly all of his wartime comrades and, satisfyingly, had outlived the Soviet Union itself, which collapsed in 1991. The exact number of Simo Häyhä's kills remains debated among military historians. The most commonly cited figure is 505 confirmed kills with his rifle, plus approximately 200 more with his submachine gun, for a total exceeding 700 kills in approximately 100 days of combat. These numbers are based on official Finnish military records, which required confirmation of kills by officers or other soldiers. The Finnish military had no incentive to inflate these numbers for propaganda purposes during the war, as they kept the information largely classified at the time. Some historians argue the numbers might be lower, perhaps closer to 400 confirmed rifle kills. Others suggest they might be even higher, as many of Häyhä's kills likely went unconfirmed in the chaos of battle. Regardless of the exact number, the consensus is clear. Simo Häyhä was the most deadly sniper in military history. No other sniper from any nation in any conflict has approached his kill count in such a short period. Häyhä's techniques have been studied by military snipers worldwide. His preference for iron sights over scopes in extreme cold weather conditions proved tactically sound and is still taught in cold weather sniper schools. His emphasis on concealment, patience, and constantly changing positions remains fundamental to modern sniper doctrine. Military historians particularly note his fieldcraft and his understanding of human psychology. Häyhä didn't just shoot soldiers. He understood how to create maximum psychological impact. By targeting officers and key personnel, he disrupted enemy command and control. By remaining invisible and seemingly unstoppable, he created an aura of fear that affected Soviet morale throughout his sector. Beyond his tactical achievements, Häyhä became a powerful symbol. For Finland, he represented the indomitable spirit of a small nation refusing to be conquered by a vastly larger aggressor. For the free world watching the Winter War, he embodied the effectiveness of skilled, motivated defenders fighting on their home ground. The David and Goliath nature of the conflict, with tiny Finland holding off the Soviet giant, captured international imagination. Simo Häyhä, the quiet farmer who became the world's deadliest sniper, was the perfect human embodiment of that narrative. The Soviet Union, meanwhile, tried to suppress stories about Häyhä. He was an embarrassment, a reminder of the Red Army's failures in Finland. Soviet records rarely mention him by name, though they certainly knew who he was. It's important to remember that behind the legend was a real human being. Simo Häyhä was not a superhuman warrior or a bloodthirsty killer. He was a farmer who loved the outdoors, who enjoyed hunting and target shooting, who was called to defend his country and did so with extraordinary skill. Those who knew him personally described a gentle, kind man who was uncomfortable with fame and violence. He took no pleasure in killing. He simply recognized it as necessary for Finland's survival. When the war ended, he put down his rifle with relief and never picked it up in combat again. In his later years, Häyhä would occasionally speak with military historians or visiting dignitaries, but he always steered conversations away from glorifying war. He would talk about the importance of defending freedom, about the sacrifices made by all Finnish soldiers, not just himself. He would emphasize that he was simply one man among thousands who fought for Finland. When pressed about his feelings regarding the men he killed, Häyhä was philosophical. He acknowledged that those Soviet soldiers were mostly conscripts, men forced to invade Finland by Stalin's regime. But he also knew that if he hadn't killed them, they would have killed his countrymen, perhaps conquered his country. He made his peace with what he had done. Part 6. The Winter War. Context. To fully understand Häyhä's achievement, one must understand the Winter War itself. It was one of the most remarkable military conflicts of the 20th century, a true David versus Goliath story that shocked the world. When Stalin demanded territorial concessions from Finland in late 1939, he was confident of quick victory. The Red Army had recently conducted purges that weakened its officer corps, but had left it with massive numbers of soldiers and equipment. Finland, by contrast, was a small, newly independent nation with limited military resources. Stalin's miscalculation was catastrophic. He underestimated Finnish determination, overestimated his own military's competence, and failed to account for terrain and weather. Finland couldn't match Soviet numbers, so they fought smart. They used mobile defense, allowing Soviet units to advance into killing zones before surrounding and destroying them. They conducted raids, ambushes, and hit-and-run attacks. They used the winter weather and dense forests as weapons. Finnish ski troops moved through forests where Soviet vehicles couldn't go. They would appear suddenly, strike with devastating effect, then vanish before Soviet forces could respond. The Finns called these tactics motti tactics, surrounding and isolating Soviet units like motti, or logs, that could be chopped up individually. Snipers like Häyhä were crucial to this strategy. They inflicted steady casualties on Soviet forces, disrupted command and control, and created psychological pressure that affected Soviet morale and effectiveness. The Winter War drew international attention and sympathy for Finland. The League of Nations expelled the Soviet Union for its aggression. Britain and France considered sending military aid to Finland. The United States provided material support. Most importantly, the Winter War revealed serious weaknesses in the Red Army. Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany, planning their own invasion of the Soviet Union, took careful note. Stalin's purges had gutted military leadership, leaving the Red Army with poor tactics and low morale. The Finnish performance suggested the Soviet Union might be vulnerable. This perception would contribute to Hitler's decision to launch Operation Barbarossa in 1941, with ultimately catastrophic results for Nazi Germany. In this sense, the Winter War and Finland's stubborn resistance had far-reaching effects on World War II. Finland ultimately signed a peace treaty in March 1940, ceding about 10% of its territory, including its second-largest city, Viborg. But Finland maintained its independence, which was the crucial victory. The cost was high. About 26,000 Finnish soldiers killed compared to somewhere between 126,000 and 167,000 Soviet casualties, though exact Soviet losses remain disputed. Today, Simo Häyhä is remembered in Finland as a national hero. Monuments commemorate his service. His rifle is displayed in a Finnish military museum. Books, documentaries, and articles continue to tell his story. In the international military community, he is studied as perhaps the ultimate example of sniper effectiveness. His techniques are analyzed, his tactics taught, his philosophy of patience and precision emphasized to new generations of snipers. But perhaps the most fitting memorial is the quiet farm in Rautjärvi, where Häyhä lived after the war. It's still there, surrounded by the same forests where he once hunted. The forests are peaceful now. The snow falls silently in winter, and the only sounds are wind through trees and the occasional bird call. It's easy to imagine a small man in white moving through those trees, patient and invisible, doing what he believed was necessary. The White Death, the farmer who became the world's greatest sniper, who helped save his nation and then returned to the quiet life he loved. Simo Häyhä never sought glory. He never wanted to be a legend. He simply wanted to defend his home, survive the war, and return to farming. That he accomplished all three, despite the odds and despite his horrific wound, is perhaps the most remarkable part of his remarkable story. In the end, he was a man who did extraordinary things in extraordinary circumstances, remained humble throughout, and lived a long life after the killing stopped. He represented the best qualities of his nation: determination, skill, resilience, and an unwavering commitment to freedom. The White Death earned his name through lethal skill. Simo Häyhä earned his legacy through quiet dignity. His story reminds us that heroes don't always seek glory, that ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things when defending what they love, and that even in the darkest times, humanity endures. Simo Häyhä died peacefully in 2002, having outlived his enemies and his era. He was laid to rest in Finnish soil, the land he fought so hard to defend. The snow still falls on his grave in winter, white and silent, just as it fell in those forests so many years ago when a small man in white became a legend. The story ends where it began, in the quiet Finnish countryside where a farmer lived, fought, and finally rested.